What's up, YouTube? The meta has shifted quite a lot recently, and so a lot of you guys have been wondering what are the best hog decks to play. The meta right now consists mainly of 5 decks: Giant Pump, Drill Cycle, Golem Beatdown, Lava Loon, and P.E.K.K.A Bridge Spam. With this in mind, let's get into ranking all the hog cycle decks in the game. So starting us off, we have Hog 2.6 Evo Knight. I'm immediately putting this in A tier, and the reason is that this deck is intended to be some kind of upgraded version of 2.6 and a better counter to the Dagger Duchess. Evo Knight is very strong against both Cannoneer and Dagger Duchess, and given that there isn't too much Nado in this meta, it should do well against most of the common meta decks. Of course, a big drawback, however, is that against P.E.K.K.A you will struggle more as you can no longer kite troops around, and basically against any Nado building deck, you just insta-lose. Since you don't have Ice Golem, you don't have any way of getting your Hog to the tower in those matchups, and so you have to rely on spell cycling more. I would say that this deck is significantly better if you have the Dagger Duchess, but even if you don't, it's still definitely playable. Though there are, of course, going to be some better options. Overall, though, I'm going to be ranking this in the A tier. The next deck is Hog Lightning Evo Bomber, and I'm going to put this deck in playable. So it's kind of a bizarre looking deck, and it's one that's kind of tough to rank since there aren't too many people playing it, and so it's still kind of unknown. Again, this Hog deck is really only played with Dagger Duchess, like right at the top of the ladder, and it seems those who don't use Dagger Duchess kind of have a poor win rate. I'm gonna rate this deck in playable, and it's a fun deck to try out. I wouldn't suggest upgrading your cards on this, but more just to have some fun in a classic challenge or give it a go on Trophy Road. I'm gonna leave it in B tier. Hog EQ Monk. Trash. Now, okay, this might be a hot take, but I genuinely think this deck is trash. I mean, it was featured a couple times in the CRL qualifiers, but I'm pretty sure it didn't win even once. And, it's not a new deck, but it has been featured more in this meta since the introduction of the Dagger Duchess. The point of the Monk is to try and get good value with, his ability versus Dagger Duchess, but in practice, it's so easy to stop the Monk crossing the bridge, and for you to waste the ability, it's so common. I've tried this deck with, very, very little success, and even in the monthly qualifiers, yeah, like I said, I don't think this deck did well at all. I'm sure there's some pros that can make it work in like a dual format, but for ladder, I'm putting it in trash. Hog Exe Nado. I'm going to put this in C tier. Now, this deck has been around for about as long as 2.6, and in fact, it was actually the third deck I ever maxed out after 2.6 Hog and 2.9 Expo. And there will always be, the Vipers and the Planets who are able to play this right at the top of ladder. But in this heavy beatdown meta, where, there's a lot of Giant and stuff like that, I would be very hesitant to be playing a Hog deck with no building. And yes, the Evo Valk does help this deck out a lot, and since its introduction, this deck has become kind of more viable than before. Like before that, it was completely trash. I'm still going to leave it in C tier because I don't think this deck has too much potential. Rocket is also not that great in the meta. It's kind of the least used spell, big spell at least. So yeah, I think this deck belongs in C tier. Oh, Classic 2.6, my first and final love. Oh, Supercell, what have they done to you? Dagger Duchess just really doesn't give, much outplay potential. And 2.6 relies so much on solo hog hits, even more than other hog decks. It's very, very hard to be able to Ice Golem Hog, as you almost always need your Ice Golem for defense. I'm sorry, but 2.6 just has to be C tier. There will, of course, be the gods of 2.6 that will still make it work in the meta, but, it is not a good deck. I'm putting it in C tier, yeah. Hog BombTower Goblins. Now, this deck is probably my favorite Hog deck right now, and I think it is one of the best, if not just outright the best Hog deck in the game. Um, the reason being is that it kind of has the same structure as Ian's deck, but there are some pretty notable changes. Like, Goblins have been replaced for Skeletons and Bomb Tower for Tesla. The Goblins change is a massively important change, because like one of the most frustrating matchups that you'll face is against Drill Cycle, and Goblins fully counter a Goblin Drill. Goblins also will make matchups like Giant Graveyard or just generally Graveyard, a lot easier and a lot more winnable. And when playing against these beatdown decks, one massive issue you commonly have is that you just don't have enough DPS. If you use skeletons or something, they just get zapped. So having goblins is a really effective way of adding DPS to your deck. Also, arrows are really common in the meta, and because it's in a Hog EQ deck, basically every player will always use their arrows against the Firecracker. And unless for some weird reason they're running arrows log or something weird like that, if they're running arrows zap, arrows snowball, neither of those kills the goblins. And usually they never have a good way of actually killing your goblins, which is, a really important thing to take into consideration. Is that right now in the meta, goblins are actually really, really strong. And I think that's the reason why this deck is so powerful. This deck also has the highest win rate of any hog deck in the game right now, and it's being used quite a lot at top ladder. Even against P.E.K.K.A, when you have skeletons, they just insta-zap it, but now against goblins, they just can't do that. The next deck is also kind of the same thing. It's with Tesla and BombTower. These two are both S-tier decks. It's kind of just a matter of preference which building you use, and both of these have incredibly high win rates. Alright, the next deck is one of Mo Light's creations. It's this Hog EQ Evo Tesla, Evo Firecracker Guards deck. And it was probably the best Hog deck last season, and, it made a lot more sense last season. The reason is that Cycle was kind of broken last season. Cannoneer plus like these really fast cycle, minor cycle, drill cycle, basically anything cycle decks are really strong. And so in order to counter that, it made a lot of sense to run Mighty Miner because, you'd have your 3-card cycle, which would then mean even against the fast cycle decks, you could outcycle them with the Hog. Also, because of the Cannoneer being so prevalent, having guards in the deck made a lot of sense. But right now, guards, they're not bad against Dagger Duchess, but they don't really get the same kind of value as they do against the Cannoneer. And the Mighty Miner, it's just not necessary anymore because right now you're just playing mostly against beatdown, heavy decks, which you can outcycle anyway. Whether you have 3-card or 4-card cycle, it doesn't really make a difference. There's been this like 180 change, 180 shift in the meta from all cycle decks being really strong to now all these beatdown decks being really strong just purely because of the Dagger Duchess. Kind of makes a lot of the changes that Mo made to this deck kind of unimportant. And so I'm going to bump it down a tier. It definitely would have been S tier last season, but I think right now it's probably an A tier. It's still a good deck. There's nothing wrong with it. It's more than just playable. It is a good deck, but it's maybe it is playable. I'm not sure. It's kind of like I'm going to keep in the top of playable for now. In my notes, I'd written this down to be in good tier, but now I think about it, I think I'm going to leave it in playable. You'll see why, because I think there's a better Mighty Miner deck than this. But we'll get to it. Next up, we've got this Hog Mortar. We have these 3 Hog Mortar decks. There's a lot of interchanging you can do. I just showed 3 here, but you can run, this one you can run Knight, you can run Poison or Earthquake, Skeletons, Goblins, Little Prince, Master. There's so much mixing and matching you can do with these Mortar decks. So I'm kind of just going to clump them all together and put all of them in playable. The reason is that I would say that basically all these Mortar Hog decks are only really used by like top ladder players. I've never seen someone mid ladder really run them. They're definitely not the creme de la creme of Hog decks, but they are extremely solid. It's harder to make it work against beatdown, and the way in which you play them against other Hog decks is definitely a lot different to other Hog decks because you have a building that's also a win condition. I personally do prefer the Poison variant, this one here, over the Earthquake variants, but it's really just a matter of preference. They're very fun to play, I will say that. If you guys haven't tried Hog Mortar, one of these 3 decks, or if you want to look on Royale API and find some other one, definitely give it a go. This has been my go-to Hog Mortar deck, and it's been a ton of fun, like just trying it out. So if you haven't tried, and I would actually definitely recommend this if you are like slightly lower down on ladder, because players have no clue what to do against Evo Mortar when you're low down on ladder. No idea. Evo Mortar is a really punishing card where if you make one small mistake and it locks, it takes your entire tower basically. So it kind of depends where you're on ladder, but I'm just going to leave them in playable for now. We've next now got Hog EQ Giant Skeleton, and I've recently tried this deck out. It's one of my favorite decks, and it's one that I've learned to play really well back in the day. It's been around for a while, and I had really high hopes for it, but sadly, it is absolute dog water in this meta. If you look at what I said at the start of the video, like what the meta decks are, P.E.K.K.A absolutely obliterates this. Lava Hound absolutely obliterates this. You know, it doesn't really do that well against Giant. Giant Skeleton just doesn't do that well against it. Drill Cycle is also not great against because of the Evo Bomber Nado combination. And so, even though I wish this deck was better, like genuinely it's one of my favorite decks, I'm going to have to put it in D tier. It's absolute trash. Um, Before I said that I had a better Hog EQ Mighty Miner deck, and this is going to be it. It's going to go in A tier, and again, it's not a new deck, this BombTower, Evo Firecracker, Evo Skeletons, but it just makes a lot more sense. If for whatever reason you don't want to run Goblins and you want to run Evo Skeletons, then it makes a lot of sense to run your Mighty Miner so you get 3-card cycle. Pairing the Mighty Miner like bomb with the Death Bomb and the splash of the BombTower also means you can just obliterate massive pushes. And it makes a lot of sense that if you're going to run a Mighty Miner deck, it should probably be something like this. Yes, you can also run Tesla in here, but I definitely prefer the BombTower. Again, that is just preference, but I do prefer the BombTower, and I will 100% recommend this deck. If you haven't tried it out on ladder, if you have all these cards maxed out and leveled up, give it a go. It's good fun as well. Playstyle is, of course, a little bit different than if you're running Evo Knight, but it's a very strong deck. I wouldn't quite put it in S tier, but it's not far off. In fact, I'm gonna put it above this Hog. What's it? 2.6, because I think it's just below S tier. But yeah, it's a very, very good deck. Now we've got Ian's Hog EQ deck. I mean, Ian's Hog EQ deck's a really hard one to rate because, like, it's always good. It's one of those decks that's just never bad, and so it just has to go in good tier. I would say these upgraded versions of Ian's deck where they've changed in goblins and used like BombTower, or especially mainly this goblin change, makes it definitely better. I would 100% choose goblins in basically every hog deck at this point. If you're playing in a meta where everyone's using Goblin Drill and P.E.K.K.A and Giant, if you guys are like in mid ladder and you're just facing Witch, Wizard, Mega Knight, stuff like that, a lot of this tier list won't necessarily apply to you. Like I would say if you're in mid ladder, 2.6 for example, really good. 2.6 does so well against mid ladder decks. This is mainly just if you're kind of like, you know, getting towards Ultimate Champion or you're in Ultimate Champion. Then this is more, you know, where you should pay attention to what actually the best hog decks are. Because anything below that, you really just need to improve on your own gameplay. It's not so much the deck you're using as the, you know, interactions maybe you're messing up or not doing as efficiently as you could do. So Ian's hog deck, I'm just gonna put an A tier because it is just an A tier deck. It always is an A tier or S tier deck depending on the meta. And yeah, for now, I think it definitely does belong here in A tier. For some reason, my notes are frozen. What's left? Anyway, we've only got one more deck, so this one, it's not too hard for me to rate. It's basically just Ian's deck, but with Delivery. Now, Delivery is added to the deck so that you can very easily counter like Firecrackers and Evo Bombers at the bridge. You just chuck a Delivery on it. It also does do pretty well against Goblin Drill. Does well against Lava Pops, for example. So there is definitely some use for this deck. On the other hand, it does slow your cycle down quite a bit. Not having an Ice Spirit means you don't have a reset. And, you know, definitely has its drawbacks, this deck. I wouldn't say this is one of the best decks in the game, but this is very much a playable deck. It just fits the category of playable to a T, where you can play it. It's good fun. You can try it out, something a bit different. People might not expect you to be running Delivery, but it's not going to be like the kind of deck that pushes you up 500 trophies from where you are right now. It's just not that kind of deck. But with that being said, I hope you guys have enjoyed this tier list. Yeah, I guess just to quickly summarize everything, I would say that it isn't worth your time to try and, you know, upgrade or play D and C tier decks if they're new to you. like if you've been playing 2.6 for a while and you've gotten used to it, you can still make it work. I'll be playing 2.6 and these Hog EQ decks in S tier. These will be mainly the decks that I'm playing this season. But if you're not new to these decks and you're thinking I want to try and learn a new Hog deck or pick up a new Hog deck, I wouldn't even be looking at any of the decks that are in C or D tier. I would say that the decks that are in B tier, as the name suggests, are playable. You can upgrade them, though I wouldn't recommend it. Um, they're more just decks that you can try out, you can try having some fun with, messing around with. And, if one of them really, you just gel with and you find that this is like the deck for you, then by all means level it up. They're not bad decks. They're just, they're kind of decks that fluctuate in the meta. And as of right now, they're very middle of the pack. As we're looking to, getting to the A tier, these are the decks I really would start considering to level up. And these are the decks that might actually help you get your PB this season. And of course, you have S tier, the zenith of all Hog decks. These basically just Ian's deck, which has just been made better to suit this meta. And these are the decks. Both of these have the two highest win rates and usage rates right at the top of the ladder. So, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have, enjoyed the video and it's helped you out, then I would appreciate you hitting the subscribe button beneath the video. If you have any questions, ask them in the comments. I'll be responding. And if you haven't already, join my Discord server from the description. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.